Hi, I'm Larry Williams, and I'm Coluna Blues Rock.
Mr. Larry Williams, I think you're a complete musician because you play rock and roll, you play jazz, you play soul, you're in the old Jarreau's band. It's a mix of gospel and soul. But what's your formation? I mean, when you were young, what did you listen? What's the first stylist that you started to play?
My father was a musician, so he started me on the clarinet when I was 6 years old, and we studied classical music, and I already started because his favorite was jazz. I started listening to saxophone jazz, so it's classical and jazz was growing up until I discovered rhythm and blues, and then world music later. And but first was classical and jazz.
Okay. And what's the difference? I mean, you're a keyboard player and a saxophone. In the keyboard, what's the difference? The keyboard inside the soul, the blues, and in the jazz.
Wow, that's I mean, there's so many differences that just every style of music is a different heart and center and what is right for it, and some are more open to other approaches than, like, blues is pretty specific, but within that there's so many different styles of just blues keyboard playing, for instance. So many two-handed different things, boogie woogie, and all kinds of things that people put in New Orleans style. It's never ending. So many styles. It's true. I spent a lot of time trying to master as many styles as I can, because I grew up wanting to be a studio musician, to play with a lot of different people, and you have to have that skill to play many styles. So there's so many differences. It's endless how many ways to approach a rock and roll and jazz, and, but they're all different, very different styles.
You speak right now about rock and jazz, and how was the foundation of Seawind, your antique fusions band?
Well, it started with three guys, of myself and two other horn players from Indiana University, who were listening to the same kinds of music. So we were classical-based guys that liked jazz a lot, modern jazz. And then we also liked funk music, James Brown, Tower of Power. So Miles Davis, we wanted to make a mix of all these kinds. And when we moved to Hawaii, we found other musicians listening to the same thing. We liked rock too, so we weren't so much a rock band as jazz and funk, but it was just, we just put everything into it that we liked, and it became our own kind of mix.
Yeah, and you also has a strong and a great work as a producer. You produce George Benson and Quincy Jones. Yeah, both are jazz, but what's the difference between Quincy and George Benson?
Well, they're both great artists. Obviously, Quincy doesn't play an instrument anymore. He was a trumpet player, arranger. Quincy is, in my book, is the best producer that ever lived, and he's my mentor. He's the guy that I learned how to make records, particularly pop records, but really to run a session, because I was lucky. In 1978, he called us to play horns, and then he called me to play keyboard, so I got to watch him work the whole time, and he is a real producer, musician, and just one of the greatest guys to ever be around. It was a lot of fun. And George Benson, is arguably the best one of the best guitar players in the world ever, a great singer. So George is a very unique guy because he does these two things as good as anybody, and he's very strong-willed. George, he knows what he wants, and sometimes he doesn't want to learn a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But I really loved working with George a lot. I had a good time with him.
Yeah.
And like I said, Quincy is my mentor for making records.
Great. And you worked with Michael Jackson. It's an icon from the 20th century. And you worked with him during Thriller, Bad and Off the Wall.
Right.
How was the experience? Because most people tell that Michael Jackson was the biggest pop artist. How was?
Well, except for, I did those three, and I also did, well, before that, I did The Wiz, was the first time that Quincy hired us, so the Broadway musical, and the record, Michael Jackson played. And so we did the Ease on Down the Road and stuff. And after I did History too. But every time except for the History record, Quincy was the producer. So he was the one calling us. Michael called me later for History, and it was fascinating to see him without Quincy. He recorded a lot and made a lot of changes, but he wasn't able to organize the way Quincy was. But it was fascinating to work with a talent like that. And he was always, to me, very nice, very sweet, very humble guy. So yeah, it was a great time to be working with Quincy and doing those records. You know, we had a lot of fun and made some good records.
Yeah.
So,
And now you're touring with Jarreau.
right.
As I say, icon of soul and gospel. What's the difference between producer and playing with Jarreau?
Well, you know, the difference is I can focus out here. Like, I'm not the musical director right now because I didn't want to be, because I just wanted to play the piano. I do the arrangements and I produce some records with Al sometimes. It's a different hat when you're helping Al move. Like, I'm still helping him as a pianist,
Yeah.
and he asks me for all kinds of things because he knows we think very much alike musically, and that's why for 35 years we work together. Not all the time we do that, but it's really fun to not be thinking about, well, I have to make all the decisions for the record. I enjoy that. It's very intense, but it's fun to be able to play with Al and just be a musician and not be the producer.
Yeah.
Okay, one other thing, Hugo, I wanted to say. You know, I produced and played with Ivan Lins, Javan, and Milton Nascimento.
Oh yeah?
Besides,
I didn't know.
yes, Gilberto Gil, Hay House, very, very famous record, even in the U.S., that David Foster produced. So these are some of my favorite musicians ever, particularly Ivan Lins.
Yeah.
I did 2 records with Ivan.
And did you work with Toninho?
Toninho
Horta?
Horta,
Yeah, he's playing.
I know
today.
he is. I hope to see him a little bit. I think Toninho sat in with us a couple of times, but I met him, and I'm a big fan of his. So many Brazilian musicians I love. You know.
Now that you're talking about Brazilian music,
yeah.
One time, American musician, he said to me, Ugo, my name Ugo, Brazilian music is different because it's so harmonic. It's different for all. Can you say about that?
Absolutely. Well, look, all of us, I'm going to say jazz musicians, world musicians, but I'm going to talk about it from the U.S. perspective. I mean, when the first music we heard from Brazil was, of course, Grof Ipanema and these kinds of things, and we started listening to Tom Jobim and the bossa stuff, and we're going, it's harmonies. This is jazz. This is like as inventive. Then with the rhythm on top of it, it's just so quintessential what formed Brazilian music, and for us, it transformed there's just a whole other avenue of great songs to play and rhythms. And so all of us learned, have so much respect for the music of Brazil. I first came here in 1984, CBS. I started working with Ronnie Foster, who produced Javon, Blues record with Stevie Wonder on it. It's a pretty big record, and Ronnie had me arrange for some artists. Maybe Papel Gomez, and maybe and some other really good artists. And they brought me down here to work with Moraes Moreiro in 1984, and with all Brazilian musicians. And I learned so much from them, and I'll never forget, that experience. And also, I came in 1987 with Yvonne, and Paulo Braga was playing drums, and Heitor TP was playing guitar. And these are incredible musicians, and we learned a lot. I think from each other too.
Yeah, sure.
They were listening to the records I was making with Quincy, and they had questions, and I had questions about the rhythms, and it's this is the way musicians learn. We speak the same language, but we're going, oh, you're doing that. Wow, I hear that.
And that's the beauty about music, right?
Yeah,
because it's a universal language.
It's very universal, and we don't see very many barriers with musicians. If we speak the same language generally, if we play something similar, but that's what brings. I couldn't speak much Portuguese, and many didn't speak English. It didn't make any difference when we made records. I could play something or tap a rhythm, and they same to me, and this is an amazing experience. So, congratulations, you have the best music in the world here.
Yeah.